Thank you for tuning in to Tershia Talks Trafficking. You can also follow me on Salt and Light on Spotify. And if you are listening to this message on Spotify, thank you and welcome. The topic of Tershia Talks Trafficking is, of course, human trafficking, or trafficking in persons, also known as TIP. Human trafficking is the exploitation of people's vulnerabilities, and it takes place when a person is either tricked, coerced, or manipulated for the use of their body or for their labor. It is very important for us to be aware of the following. South Africa's legislation, which indicates that human trafficking does not necessarily require transportation, is a very important factor that we should always remember. A person can be trafficked and exploited without being transported. So in fact, the term trafficking can be deceptive, as it does not describe the word for human trafficking or TIP. So very important factor for us to always remember. Also, the 30th of July is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to create awareness around this topic. We can simply use the excuse of, well, it is 30 July, and can you believe it is the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons? Let me tell you the following, or do you know this simple fact of human trafficking? So I'm going to share with you some interesting facts. And for those who have been following me, I do hope that you have remembered some of the interesting facts about human trafficking and that you are using it in your conversations with loved ones and with the people that cross your path on a daily basis. So remember, the reason why we have World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, according to the United Nations, they are saying that globally, human trafficking is rising. It's the global crises, conflicts, and climate emergencies are actually escalating the trafficking risks, and displacement and socioeconomic inequalities are impacting millions of people worldwide, and it's leaving them vulnerable to exploitation by traffickers. So remember, human trafficking is the exploitation of people's vulnerabilities. Those who lack legal status, live in poverty, have limited access to education, healthcare, or decent work, face discrimination, as we know. They face violence or abuse, or come from marginalized communities. They are often the primary targets of trafficking. And also with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic changed the characteristics of trafficking, pushing it further underground and also potentially increasing the dangers to victims by making the crime less likely to come to the attention of authorities. And as per some previous discussions, we have learned that human trafficking is a hidden crime. So the pandemic has actually made it even more hidden and pushed it even further underground. We also see that after and during the pandemic, that traffickers have become far more active online, working more wiser rather than harder. So always keep that in mind, that traffickers are not just strangers hanging around on the corners of the streets, or in vulnerable areas or around schools. Traffickers are very much active online, and we need to become responsible internet users, and especially social media users, and we need to teach our children accordingly. Well, that is not actually the topic of today's discussion. Today's discussion, I want to focus a little bit on the issue of prostitution. So we see, unfortunately, that the sex trade here in Cape Town, where I am based, its red light district is The sex trade is escalating within the red light district and also specific other parts of the Western Cape. And of course, in whichever area you find yourself, I can guarantee you that there is prostitution taking place. And wherever there is prostitution, there is also human trafficking and exploitation. We have seen that there are ratepayers associations that are taking action. Why? They are taking action against people who are buying property, and I'm now referring to the Western Cape specifically, or Cape Town, for the purposes of running illegal brothels. A few months ago, we saw that over 160 properties were to be investigated with regards to these allegations. So prostitution is a countrywide issue. It is a global issue. In South Africa, we see that it's a source country, a destination country, and also a transit country. Unfortunately, however, there is not a country in this world that is not affected by human trafficking. So the focus has to shift away from women or persons within the sex trade, or who are selling sex, I should rather say, and it should move rather to the system of prostitution. Because the system of prostitution, for one, it supports inequality. It also supports gender-based violence and absolutely male entitlement. It supports lawlessness and societal decay. So it's very critical for us to know that the word sex work, with the survivors that we work with, that word is actually extremely offensive to survivors of the sex trade, many women who are still in the sex trade, as well as prominent human rights bodies, find that word incredibly offensive. So this is a very important factor to remember. We know that we often hear on mainstream media the words sex work or sex workers. However, for many within the sex trade, of course not all, but many within the sex trade, as well as survivors of the sex trade, the term sex work or sex worker is incredibly offensive. We need to understand that there are two different aspects when it comes to prostitution. Now, I'm bringing up this topic because I'm wanting you, the listener, to understand more the world of those who are in prostitution. And I also want us to understand the difference in specific terminology. A couple of years ago, we did have the South African government proposing what they were calling the decriminalization of prostitution. However, there is a vast difference between full decriminalization, partial decriminalization, and what the government was pushing was not decriminalization of prostitution. They were actually pushing full decriminalization of prostitution. And so I'll quickly explain what that means exactly. So the terminology that we use, and especially in mainstream media, can actually deceive communities. So we need to be very clear in understanding what is the truth, and is the mainstream media actually using the correct terminology, and what do these various terminology mean. So when it comes to partial decriminalization, it is based on equality. Part of a system and part of a marginalized community. So it's focus on joblessness, lack of education, and on poverty. So part of the system and part of the marginalized community. So partial decriminalization would mean that one would only criminalize not the acts in selling sex, but rather the acts in having brothels, in facilitating the selling of sex, in sex buying. And if you truly think about it, the true problem or the true root of prostitution is the sex buyers. Okay, so we have to go after consumers. So we have to go after consumer level demand. And many countries have actually taken that route when it comes to partial decriminalization, where they actually go after the consumers, because that is the root problem. So some countries that are following this model, and it has been proven to be a successful model, is countries such as Ireland, some Scandinavian countries, Canada. So we see our government was proposing the legalizing of everything. Pimping, brothels, sex buying, third-party facilitators. And it is inevitable the harm that will await society. If you can imagine the following being completely legalized or decriminalized, fully decriminalizing pimping, brothels, sex buying, third-party facilitators. Within our country, one can only imagine the deterioration of society. Many do not know that they are actually being trafficked, and we see that and we hear that from testimonies from survivors of prostitution. Their position of vulnerability was being abused and are being abused. Once we say to men in a country such as ours, our beautiful South African country, where there are struggles with gender-based violence, if we say, okay, men, now you can do whatever you want legally, we can only imagine what will happen to our communities, to our society, and to our country. There have been so many reports from reputable contacts, people who work within our National Freedom Network against sexual exploitation of tents, containers that are set up across the road, even from courts, in full view of the public, men freely walking in and out. There have also been reports of pimps who are soliciting children to use their lunch money to pay for sex. And these are the things that are being done whilst prostitution is still illegal in our country. And we have people who are pushing and advocating for prostitution to be fully decriminalized. Okay, so just to make it clear, this is not speculation. It will be an absolute horrendous situation for South Africa. Relevant messages that we need to push out in society is very, very important. We need our leaders to speak up. Every industry and society need to get involved in speaking up against the full decriminalization of prostitution. Social developments, companies and businesses. It will also, of course, affect home affairs. So everyone needs to stand together and really realistically dissect the reality of what would happen if prostitution is fully decriminalized in South Africa. South Africa, as in the words of Dr. Marcel van der Walt, will become the brothel of Africa. And there will be enormous complications, and that will trickle up into Africa and across the globe, of course. Okay, so it is very important for us to know, and as I've mentioned earlier, it is exceptionally offensive for so many who have come from prostitution, who are still within the prostitution system, to use the words sex work or sex worker. And the appropriate words is, first of all, we need to realize that we are dealing with people. We are dealing with people who are mothers. We are dealing with people who are daughters. We are even dealing with people who are men. There are men also within the industry, many of them that have been forced into it, male and female also who have decided to go into prostitution because of circumstance. So we do not say within our network, those who work closely with human traffic victims and survivors, we do not say ever, because we know that these people have gone into prostitution because they had no choice. There is this general consensus of, well, they decided to. The reality is that circumstance and desperation push people within or into the prostitution system. Besides that, there are also many who are being forced into the prostitution system by traffickers. So what is the appropriate words for us to use? Not prostitute, not sex worker, but rather you're a person, you're a daughter, you're a mother, you're a brother, you're a son. You are a person in prostitution, or you are a prostituted person. So out of respect and love, knowing that we do not always know the circumstances of the individual, and therefore we shall refer to them as persons in prostitution or prostituted persons. So we talk about the system of prostitution. The reality is there are physical, psychological, and emotional violence in prostitution, whether you were forced into it by a trafficker or whether you were forced into it by circumstance. You are and will be exposed to physical, psychological, and emotional violence. That is why we talk about the victims and the survivors of prostitution. And also a very interesting fact is that overall we've seen that most who find themselves in the prostitution system, their life expectancy is between 7 and 8 years. Why is that? Some of the obvious factors is because of the violence and because of drug use. Most of them are made dependent on drugs, alcohol, and those are some of the shackles in which prostituted people are kept in the system of prostitution. A while back, there was in the media a take girl child to work day. I don't know, or taking a girl child to work. I don't know if any of you can remember that, but you take a girl child to work. You want to become a nurse, you want to become a soldier, a fireman, policeman, police lady. Can you imagine taking a child to sex work? Okay, there I use that terminology, but just for the sake of this explanation, can one imagine that? That actually gave me also some food for thought. So we have some stakeholders that are within our network who work on the legal side of things, and they rightfully highlighted to us the fact that in our Constitution we have Section 84.2G, and I'm just checking my notes to make sure that I'm getting this right. So in our Constitution, Section 84.2G would call for a referendum, and our president can do that. So if this subject comes up and the full legal decriminalization of prostitution comes up again and is tabled again within our country, our president can call for a referendum, and we strongly believe that that would be the right way to go about with regards to this decision. I also would like to share with you some very interesting facts and pointers that have been shared with our National Freedom Network by an amazing lady, Emma from Brave to Love. So Brave to Love works directly with people who are within the prostitution system. And according to her, she says that prostitution is the last unrecognized form of sexual abuse. And I can understand that, and I'm sure you might understand it as well. We are very quick to judge. Myself as well also used to say, well, that person decided, they made the choice to go into prostitution. However, now working with our network and with trafficked victims and survivors of sexual exploitation, I see that every single prostituted person is a victim of the system. And I say that because the person was forced into the situation because of circumstance and desperation, and also some have been forced into it, manipulated into it, and even tricked into it by traffickers. Emma also says that we need to always remember where there's a demand, there always needs to be a supply. And that is the sad part of prostitution. And also with the survivors that she works with, she says there's a big fear, not only of the traffickers, but also a fear of change. So there is a very big psychological factor that also comes into play. With prostitution, many are groomed by female friends. So we see that, especially here in South Africa, that many are groomed by female friends, making those female friends traffickers who trap and lure their own friends into the prostitution system. And also legalizing or, fully decriminalizing prostitution will not take away the shame. That is a very heavy burden that we see our survivors carry, is the shame coming from the prostituted system. And also, prostituted persons are often referred to as a service provider. We see that that is rather also a more respectful terminology to use for a prostituted person or a person who is stuck within the prostituted system. Every woman in prostitution has her monster, and very, very important for us to know this and remember this. Clients who have raped her or him, choked her, pulled a knife out on her, stabbed her, forced her into specific sexual acts that she is uncomfortable with, or even sexual acts that are very damaging to her body. Within the prostituted system, there is also what is called lady boys. Sex buyers want to stay anonymous. Why? A very big question to ask. If a prostitution or so-called sex workers are just doing work, why is it that sex buyers want to stay anonymous? To them, it is also a shameful act, and sex buyers have to be exposed. It is the sex buyers that have to be revealed because they are the root of the problem. They are the root of the abuse. In South Africa, also according to Brave to Love, organized crime takes place in every single brothel in South Africa. This comes from people who work directly with victims, who have set their feet in these brothels on various occasions. Organized crime takes place in every single brothel in South Africa. The longer a woman stays in prostitution, the more they get or become involved in illegal activity. And that is due to the psychological abuse, that is due to physical threats, that is due to fear, and a number of other factors. So prostitution has dangerous ripple effects. Also, we see that crystal meth is commonly used as a substance within prostitution. And the main reason for that is that it's an upper drug. It enhances sexual sensation. So we know that drug use is very much alive within the prostituted system. And so is drug trafficking. A majority of owners and managers are foreigners. So I'm now specifically referring to South Africa. And we see that with the recent updates that I've received from Brave to Love, many are Bosnian, many are Russian, and also Chinese. Some are Thai men and women. And then also many are Zimbabwean women. We have found that some of the most successful sex rings are actually run by women. Some so-called upper-class brothels have a doctor and a psychologist available. Once again, we have to ask ourselves why. So some of these upper-class brothels, and I'm sure some specific names might come to mind, they have a doctor and a psychologist on the premises and available. Prostitution is simply a form of slavery. We cannot say that bodies are commodities. Bodies are not commodities. Women, unfortunately, absorb most of the risk when it comes to sex, which is a very sad part. However, we need to realize that there are also men who are victims of the prostitution system, and they also suffer physical and emotional harm. As I mentioned earlier, prostitution is the last unrecognized form of sexual abuse. When we speak to some of our survivors of sex trafficking and those who come from the prostitution system and have managed to escape, they say that money is the cruelest part of the abuse. For many of them, money is the cruelest part. It is such an emotional and psychological part, knowing that they are being used and abused and they are being paid. Most of that money does not even go to them. Where there are women who had options and go into prostitution, often we say that there is the myth of the happy hooker. Myth of the happy hooker. That is the truth, and do remember that. Myth of the happy hooker. There's no such thing as a happy hooker. Also, we want to think of, when you're a fireman, when you're a nurse, when you're a policewoman or a policeman, where will you be 20 years from now? You would have climbed the ladder. You might have, been very successful in your career. But when it comes to prostitution, where will you as the prostituted person be in 20 years from now? We have spoken to some people who are within the prostituted or the prostitution system, who have said, I'm doing what I want to do with my body. There is a whole debate and argument around that. However, I can just briefly say no. You are not doing what you want to do with your body. Others are doing what they want to do with your body. And that is what prostitution is. So just quickly to go back to those who are within the prostitution system, we've seen many who have been advocating on social media, on mainstream media, etc. Many who do demonstrations, some who wear T-shirts that say sex worker, and just advocates for prostitution as a way of an income. We have seen that those that we have confronted and those that have been investigated are actually people who are not selling their own bodies for sex. These are people who are recruiting others into the prostitution system. So very important facts and very interesting for us to remember. I would also like to point out before we end off, there are men and also women with dangerous fetishes. Those are normally ones that also seek out prostituted persons, and it is all about power. And unfortunately, the reality of prostitution is that it's exceptionally easy to get into it, but it is extremely hard to get out. I see that our time is almost up, so I hope that you have learned something from this talk. And remember, South Africa has a national human trafficking hotline, 0800 222 777. This is a 24/7 anonymous reporting line, and you can also contact them for free job vetting. So remember, in South Africa, when we look at our reliable stats, fake job offers is the number way in which traffickers lure their victims. So use the National Human Traffic Hotline's free job vetting service, 0800 222 777. And also remember, Missing Children South Africa, they deal with missing children and they also deal with missing adults. Their number 072 missing or 072 647 7464. And then the Joseph Movement WhatsApp line 082 766 9870. Search Joseph Movement in your search engine Follow, like, and share our posts and information. It can possibly save someone from falling prey to a human trafficking situation. You can also be part of our Combat Human Trafficking WhatsApp group. Simply send a WhatsApp to 082 766 9870 and we will add you. Thank you for joining me, Tershia de Klerk, here to help expose exploitation. And remember, if you suspect something, say something. 0800 222 777. God bless.